Welcome, everyone. Before we get started, if everyone could please mute their cell phones and pagers that are here in the room, that would be great. So welcome to Brickworks. We're here on San Juan Island in the center of the Salish Sea. My name is Lovel Pratt, and I'm the Marine Protection and Policy Director at Friends of the San Juans. Our mission is to bring people and nature together to protect the San Juan Islands and the Salish Sea through education, science, policy, and law. We respectfully honor that this beautiful place we work to protect every day includes the lands, waters, and tangible and intangible resources of the Northern Straits people. We're here today to learn about how we can improve emergency response preparedness and ensure that when there's an oil spill, the least harm is done to oil spill responders, shoreline residents and visitors, and these unceded waters of the Northern Straits peoples here in the Salish Sea and marine waters throughout this nation. Before the presentation begins, I want to urge you all to support the organizations here today making this presentation possible. Friends of the San Juans and the Alert Project. We hope you will support the work that Friends and the Alert Project do to protect this place. You'll learn more about the Alert Project in just a moment. You can support Friends by becoming a member or donating at SanJuans.Org. And please sign up to be an Action Alert responder. Our executive director at Friends, Eva Schulte, is here today. Yes, please say hi to Eva here when you get a chance. And there's more information about Friends at the table there and also online. I'm also excited to share that SanJuans.Today is live streaming this event and making it possible for everyone to participate in this presentation. We're thrilled about their presence in the islands and so glad we already have people tuning in from across the archipelago and Salish Sea and beyond. And now I am so honored to introduce our presenter, Dr. Riki Ott, founder of the Alert Project. Riki is a marine toxicologist and former commercial ship fisherwoman. Since the Exxon Valdez oil spill in 1989, Riki has been a champion for the environment and for people, standing up to oil and chemical companies and their false claims about oil spills' environmental and human health impacts. Thank you, Riki, for joining us today. Thank you.
I am really happy to be here. Especially really happy to be hosted by the Friends of the San Juans and working with the SanJuan.Today live stream folks. So this is really great. This is how everything happens with local groups stepping up. So I will get into who I am in just a sec, but we're going to just start rolling here. I do direct the Alert Project. Alert is a project of Earth Island Institute. More on that in a bit. If you have questions during the live stream event, please send them to Lovel, who just introduced me. She's going to be womaning the questions and answers, and that will follow the presentation. So what exactly is oil spill response? What it is not is a cleanup. It is not a cleanup. What the response activities, booms, burning, skimming here on the top, do is actually either remove the oil, like skimming, or transfer it into the air or into the air and water. It doesn't actually get it out of the environment. And once it's in the water, then it sinks. So how successful are these cleanup technologies? By the way, the same ones were used during the Exxon Valdez oil spill, and that was 21 years before the Deepwater Horizon. Skimming, 3% of the oil of the BP Deepwater Horizon was removed by skimming operations. 5% was transferred into the air by burning operations alone, and that does not count the additional natural transfer of the oil on the surface up into the air, which was about 40%. Most of the oil was actually transferred up into the air, where it affected downwind communities. And finally, we have the dispersants. And I think this is optimistic, but anyway, they're claiming that 8% of the oil was successfully dispersed somewhere into the water. That's what they're really measuring. And that's the part of the problem, is that spill response activities have historically been considered an environmental disaster. The oil is the problem. We have to attack the oil. It's not been thought of as an oil in the air problem, which now we know is where most of the oil ends up. So when it becomes an oil in the air problem, we're talking about human health concerns, whether it's the public on the shore or the workers that are actually out in the field on the water working to remove oil. So we know better now, and now we can do better. And that's kind of the point of this talk. What do we know? What do we need to do? So I have been doing this for 35 years. I cut my teeth on the Exxon Valdez oil spill, and the last 10 of it have been with the ALERT project. What we've consistently learned, putting from my public hat on and speaking public point of view, is that toxic products have consistently been used. People get sick because of the oil and the toxic products and that combination. And it's a long-term problem. It impacts long-term health of people and the environment. And we keep rolling out the same response equipment and having these exact same results every single spill. I've been to the nation's largest oil spills, Exxon Valdez, the Deepwater Horizon, the tar sand spills up in the Kalamazoo River in Michigan. Always the same thing. And the reason I go is to coach people what to do once they're sick. We know from Alaska, which has something called citizen advisory councils, that they have a track record now of 30 years, and we know that these things successfully help prevent spills, plus make spill response more efficient, and also minimize harm from oil activities by doing monitoring and kind of providing a feedback loop. So more on this in a minute. The opportunities for change right now are huge. I haven't seen anything like this where everything's kind of converging. There is a nationwide review right now of all area contingency plans. So think of our coastline as a necklace of area contingency plans. They're all being reviewed because of what happened during the BP disaster. So all of our coastal areas are covered under this review, and we have the opportunity now to just shuffle the old, what we've done in the past, business as usual, into new plans, or we actually update the plans to better protect human health, to add in citizen advisory councils, and to apply the new rules that we have for safer use of these dispersants and other products. So we're sitting at sort of this big moment of change. So what has happened in the past is that these plans have consistently failed for a couple reasons. Before the Exxon Valdez, the plan under the Clean Water Act of 1972 was that there was going to be one national response team and 13 regional response teams. And you can see the coastal regions are 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and then up on the west coast, 9, 10, and offshore we have Alaska, Oceania, and the Caribbean. So those are our 13 regions. And what's missing from this plan? We have regional planners, we have national planners. Well, think about fire and earthquake. Where do those things happen? Locally, they happen in someone's backyard. So what we discovered after the Exxon Valdez oil spill was the local plans, okay? The Oil Pollution Act of 1990 was passed, and it established area committees comprised of state and local planners and the regional guys, the feds, the EPA and the Coast Guard, and everybody was supposed to work together to plan oil spill response, basically. And in addition, Congress added 2 pilot programs. So that's area committees. This is one wheel now to make this whole response program work. Congress also added 2 pilot programs in Alaska, these regional citizen advisory councils. And the general idea was to make sure the plans worked as intended. They were a feedback loop. If these activities are really supposed to minimize harm from oil, do they? You know, what's going on? Is the environmental monitoring? The industry has long been saying, oh, oil spills, it will just be a really transient effect. And it turns out, actually, no, it's like a long-term effect. So these committees are citizens like us, like Friends of the San Juans. I mean, they're us weighing in on what we want to see happen in our backyard. We have to live with the consequences. So we know the weather. We know weather patterns, we'll get into this. So here's the other wheel. These things were supposed to be the wheels that trundle this whole thing along successfully. Well, what happened? Let's see, Oil Pollution Act, so we're now 20 years in when this passed. And there was a lot of power that was already built up by the regional and national team to make these decisions on what products get used. And they didn't give up power. Basically, the upper 2 levels usurped the power of area committees. So we have them, but it's questionable like who's running them. They're not quite running as intended. And regional citizen advisory councils never got replicated in the lower 48. That just didn't happen. We tried several times, citizens in various regions of the country, and the reason that they didn't get replicated is because they're so successful in Alaska with making the industry accountable for its actions, that the industry really doesn't want these things anywhere else. So here's the big question, you know, what do we really have that changed? And well, then we have the BP Deepwater Horizon. So that was it, same failures, same reasons really. And so before we move forward with what we want, we're going to take a quick look backward at citizen involvement and how it's been successfully applied after the Exxon Valdez oil spill. This is an example of environmental stuff. So what happened in Prince William Sound with the Regional Citizens Advisory Council, and these are just the early examples. The council improved oil spill prevention by things like weather restrictions, a new type of tug than the conventional push-me-pull-you tugs, called a tractor tug, which were being used in Europe but not in the US, and also double-hull tankers. And yes, double-hull tankers was part of the Oil Pollution Act of 1990, but the industry for the first 10 years tried to dodge it and undermine it and get it undercut. And it was the Citizens Advisory Council that blocked every move for 10 years, and finally the industry went ahead and did it. Another thing was that the citizens were actually reviewing the plans and calling out where things wouldn't work because of our experience with the Exxon Valdez. And it's like, no, you guys have to do better than this. So these things, these contingency plans actually got a more serious review. And finally, there was improved air and water quality just by consistent monitoring of like tanker operations, the terminal operations. This really wasn't being done. And this is the fishermen's blockade of Valdez Narrows across the top. That happened after the Prince William Sound ecosystem collapsed, 4 years after the Exxon Valdez oil spill. President Bill Clinton at the time sent in his Interior Secretary to figure out what that bunch of fishermen wanted. And what the fishermen wanted very clearly was comprehensive ecosystem studies, which of course had not been anticipated. So those got funded as a condition of disbanding this blockade, which was holding up Seattle's, basically the West Coast oil supply. It went on for 3 days. So the participatory research that came out of the comprehensive ecosystem science after a decade of that, actually found that, one, the spill was linked with the long-term harm. That oil was 1,000 times more toxic than anybody had dreamed in the 1970s when the Clean Water Act passed, and that actual long-term monitoring was needed, not of individual species, sea otters, the salmon, the herring, no, the whole ecosystem together and what preyed on what, because it all added up. Like if the sea otters die, suddenly all the kelp is gone because the sea urchins eat it. So there was these cascading effects that happened that no one really had put the pieces together. So this actually changed science, globally, from silo to comprehensive ecosystem stuff. All right, so now we get to the Deepwater Horizon, and this is the first oil spill where there was actually studies on human health, animals, and I'm talking lab studies where you could really define what concentrations of either people or animals were exposed to, clinical studies and epidemiology studies, not only on people, a Coast Guard cohort, but also the citizen responders, but also dolphins. There was a whole cohort of dolphins that were studied and are still studied and have proven exact parallel to human health problems. So what was found basically is that these dispersants, the Corexit dispersants, are powerful carcinogens. Corexit 9527 triggers 27 cancer pathways in humans and rodents, and for 9500, 8 pathways in humans and animals, mice. But there's also studies on sperm whale cells and all kinds of other things. These Corexit dispersants are also powerful teratogens, which disrupts development of fetuses in the womb. So whether it's a dolphin or a human baby, that's the kind of harm they cause. And then other reproductive effects of being able to have babies to begin with, okay? For example. And there are also, this is really bad, these are sensitizers. They're respiratory sensitizers and skin sensitizers. And what this means is this is reoccurring respiratory problems, reoccurring skin problems, and you become sensitive to chemicals, light, sound. We'll show you this more. But this is, all these are like forever problems. And the last set here is it also causes something called specific target organ toxicity it's a neurotoxin, for God's sakes. It's central and peripheral nervous systems were impacted in humans and animals, and also the blood, respiratory, and cardiovascular system. And what people said of the Coast Guard study, here's all these young, fit, predominantly white males. They're not supposed to be having heart problems. The mean age was 30. They're having heart problems way before their time. And even the citizen responders, their mean age was 40-ish, and about 10 years, and they were also having heart problems way earlier than they should have. Okay, so the manufacturer's statements regarding the human health impacts that their products cause were last reported. This is the most updated safety data sheets that they have, 2019. For carcinogens, here's what the manufacturer reported. No data available. For teratogens and reproductive effects, no data available. Sensitizers, no data available. Specific organ toxicity to any organ system, no data available. Okay, this is wrong. Okay, there were plenty of data available. So what's happened here is that since all this data and these studies have come out, the manufacturer actually discontinued its Corexit product line voluntarily in December of 2022. And rather than have to report the known human health effects. This is what their safety data sheet actually looks like. And this voluntarily discontinued business was because the citizens, alert and allies, actually petitioned, well, here, first thing we did was we petitioned back in 2012 that these chemicals were a problem. We needed to update our rules. Alert rallied almost 20,000 people to comment. It was like 18,000. There was what the courts ruled an unreasonable delay in EPA responding. So we had to sue. And that would be alert and allies. And as a result of the lawsuit, we had a victory that was a court-supervised finalization of EPA's rules. The court actually supervised EPA to make sure they were on schedule and this was actually going to happen. So these updated rules popped out that require now truthful reporting. And, you know, we are not getting truthful reporting, but rather than do it, they discontinued their products. And these products are the most globally popular products, so they're all in other countries. They're in all of our states. And suddenly, they've been discontinued. Now, under the new rules, as new products are tested, it's like the deadline for getting your new products into EPA and having them approved is December 12th, 2025. Up until that time, the old products are what we have, and they're still available for use. So this is part of what I'm here for, we alert, is to talk about this interim period and what we can do to ban these chemicals now instead of waiting for another year plus to December. So the citizen involvement regarding environmental protection is, to clarify, EPA tests and lists products that may be used. So EPA creates this whole list of products, what may be used, but it's up to the states to choose what products to actually use or not use. And this process of choice has been dominated by the regional planners, okay? So what we're getting ready to do here is to activate the local concerned citizens and have us all, we'll get into the actual steps, but the idea is, this is the goal, to ban use of these discontinued products effective immediately, okay? And if the feds, I mean, that would be the ideal thing, because then the feds wouldn't have to fuss about that they want to use these products that they've used for the past 50 years. We can now require supplemental testing. Supplemental testing means every state looks at what species of concern are in our waters, salmon here, for example, and herring maybe, and test the next generation products on animals and in water conditions that are in our backyards, all around the nation. We can do the supplemental testing, and we, the state, can actually say nothing is used until it passes the supplemental test. We're not just going to use any old product on the list. We want to test it, and also to create the citizen advisory councils, which could be the ones managing the testing, for example. Okay, so now we're switching to human health, and this is after the BP disaster. The president's, this is a national commission on the Deepwater Horizon, and in their report to the president in 2011, here's this great quote: "Industry and government responders did not adequately anticipate or address the magnitude of potential human health impacts. And this is because it's been an environmental problem, not an oil in the air problem." So it hasn't been properly anticipated for 50 years. So the opportunity now is that surely the National Commission isn't the only one to have realized this, right? And the NRT is the National Response Team. OSHA, of course, is Occupational Safety and Health Administration. And these are agencies now The National Response Team is comprised of 15 federal agencies, including OSHA, NIOSH, EPA, the Coast Guard. And the idea is that in 2012, they recognized that environmental monitoring is insufficient to protect human health. But these agencies do not yet require symptom-based monitoring. So if you're getting some of these health headaches, dizziness, cold and flu-like symptoms, we're not requiring that. And environmental monitoring is like air quality monitoring, and what it is, it's monitoring for a single chemical at a single concentration. The trouble is, during an oil spill, you're getting hundreds of chemicals coming at you at once, and you want to be tested for that mixture. Well, the OSHA standards are not geared for mixtures like that. So, but your body is geared to say, this is dangerous, hachoo, hachoo, or cough, 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 wheeze, dizzy, something's wrong, I'm in danger. That would be a symptom-based health monitoring. So the opportunity for the states now is actually to create worker health monitoring units. Believe it or not, this does not exist. And I think this is not just oil spills, this is all hazard responses. And we do not have we have the capacity, but we, the nation, has never put this into effect, where you're looking at the specific workers who are going out. What about the public who's breathing the air that's all coming ashore? So to create public health assessment units, that would be the goal here, is to get public health and human health part of oil spill response. And what's going on is that there's been movement towards that front already. Regional Response Team 10, so that's us, Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, but Idaho's no seacoast, created a health and safety task force. I co-chaired it, and we gave our final report this year, 2024, and the recommendation was to go ahead and, there's enough known now with science to create these health units, both of them, worker and public health. And meanwhile, California, which has more oil spills, I think, with what's going on down there with oil right offshore. So they're in Region 9. Their Regional Response Team 9 and California already have created public health monitoring units and worked them in. They're not symptom-based yet, and that's why our RT 9 and 10 were working together to figure out what we know and what we can update. Okay, so here is, for example, this is the interim dispersant use policy in Washington and Oregon. There's one of these plans, or more than one. There's one plan for every area, okay? And it's going to look something like this, where the red is inland, because dispersants are only used in saltwater, which includes estuaries and, even 1% salt water, as long as it has a bit of salt. Yeah. This fine gold line here up the coast is actually coastal jurisdiction, a state jurisdiction, and that color is represented by this case-by-case basis. And you notice in Washington something kind of crazy happens right here, and this is because this is the Macaw tribe a usual and accustomed area for subsistence use in maritime waters, and they insisted on retaining their jurisdiction over what gets used in their area. So imagine this model, the tribes in the lower Washington state applying that model, or the tribes in Oregon applying that model. We could have this all around our nation. So we're going to take a closer look now at the San Juans, which is up here. And I want you to imagine now, it's not hard to imagine here, a lot of people live close to the coast. And in fact, this whole area is in a case-by-case basis. But that means dispersants could be used, okay? And if it's a bigger spill, it would be more likely than not. So here is why dispersant use close to shores and communities is a concern. And this is what happened during the BP disaster. This is a case study of Lori B., I'm calling her. Lori B. and her husband Dennis live in their home in Coden, Alabama. So here we are, this is Alabama, and that little niche right there is Mobile Bay, okay? And their forever home, they rebuilt after Hurricane Katrina. It was not totally destroyed, but this is it. This is where they wanted to live. This is a satsuma tree in the front yard, produced about 200 fruit annually. All right, so they live, like I said, about a quarter mile from the coast. So here's Mobile Bay, and if you come down the west side of Mobile Bay and go south, and then head a little bit west, you end up in these two little communities called Coden, which is where Lori is, and Bayou La Batterie. And Lori's like right down in here, a quarter mile from Portersville Bay. And what was happening in Portersville Bay when, in summer of 2010, was that the dispersant, the mud boats we called them, but the dispersant toting boats, here this is a tote of dispersant, were being sprayed in Portersville Bay daily. 5 boats were working this area and just spray, spray, spray. And the air came ashore. And Lori and her husband, first they went down to watch the boats, but then they started to get dizzy and Lori's throat started to close. So they went into their homes. They closed all the windows and doors. And the smell permeated everything, every day, okay? So this was going on. And then on August 21st of 2010, to make things worse, Lori was directly sprayed with Corexit dispersant. This is well after the date, over a month after offshore spraying had stopped. It was still being used onshore and nearshore. And after she was directly sprayed, she encountered a whole host, a litany of reoccurring health issues, everything from skin rashes to the point of permanent scarring and hair loss, respiratory problems, whether it's asthma, bronchitis, blurry vision, nosebleeds. And this is not just Lori. This is tens of thousands of people across the Gulf. The reason I chose Lori's story was because Lori took photographs of the dispersant tote. It's 9527. And these ones down in this corner here, the neurological ones like memory loss, vertigo, dizziness, seizures, and blackouts, that all came a little bit later. But initially, it was these earlier problems. Okay, so now, almost a year after she got sprayed, it's now mid-July of 2011, she gets a small blister on her leg, and that turned into a large draining lesion. And her arms and her legs just kind of broke out in this rash. She said it felt like reptile skin. The rash spread across her shoulders and her back. And the Mayo Clinic could not determine the cause. In September, of 2011, worried she might lose her leg or her life, she visited a medical doctor in Georgia, in Atlanta, who is trained in chemically caused illnesses. He began an immediate chemical detox treatment. Lori had shared with the Mayo Clinic and all the previous doctors who were not trained in chemicals. I've been chemically poisoned, but they looked everywhere else for what was the cause. And nothing was helping her until she began this detox treatment. So she started to get better, and now 5 years passed, so now we're talking about 2016. This is when she started having these more severe neurological problems, seizures and blackouts. So she went again to the detox doctor, and this is a SPECT scan. On the left is, the SPECT scan is of the brain activity red and white donate to our projects. Show areas of increased activity due to toxic exposure and emotional stress, okay? And in particular, this diamond pattern here, up in the, this area of the brain, this is the base of the brain, by the way. Base of the brain here, this is the right side, top side of the brain, left side of the brain. So in the bottom of the brain, this diamond area here is a condition that's characteristic of benzene exposure, toxic exposure, but also emotional stress, extreme emotional stress. So on the right side here, this scan, this SPECT scan, is the surface of the brain. So again, the base is upper left, and then the right, the top of the brain, left side of the brain. And what you see here is in the temporal lobe and the parietal lobe, you see this sort of like cavernous here, crinkle, and this hole here. And this signifies tissue that has atrophied, and where it's atrophied is in the region of the brain that controls memory, function, behavior, basically how you live and think and act in the world and feel with your emotions. It's now to the point where it also is the area where that responds to smells, sounds, light, that regulates all that. And what's happened is Lori now is so sensitive. This is where you get hypersensitivity or multiple chemical sensitivity. It used to be called that. It's more than just chemical sensitivity. Light, sound, noise. So Lori now cannot really tolerate bright lights or noise. It just unnerves her completely. She's had to discontinue her job. These chemical sensitivities, by the way, are covered under Americans with Disabilities Act. And in Lori's own words, this is what she has to say about her life now, which is never compare resilience from a storm with an oil disaster. I can rebuild after a storm, but life after toxins is an everyday life sentence for the rest of my life. And this is what tens of thousands of people are dealing with in the Gulf, and Lori is the one who was able to get some of this testing done. So, this is why we want to get involved and make sure this doesn't happen in the San Juans or anywhere else along our coastlines, especially with a discontinued product. So here is the old EPA regions that you've seen before, and now what's happening is EPA does inland spills. The coasts are controlled by the Coast Guard, and I'm also talking about the Great Lakes. So not only our marine coasts, and right now there's this change so that every single one of these sectors, we're going to take a more close look at the West Coast here. Each of these sectors is going to have their own area contingency plan, okay? Which sounds good, except, well, what's happening, and this is all going to be completed by October 2026, is that there's not really any updating going on. There's a lot of reorganizing going on, okay? So this is a call for action. It's all hands on deck. I mean, we can raise the bar everywhere by one state succeeding in getting things changed, and then other states can replicate it. So this is why we need to get active here. And on the alert website, there are letters to each of our coastal states, all 23 of them. And it's a template letter asking the state, your state, to simply refuse to use these toxic products. Friends of the San Juans, thank you, because you've already signed on to a letter. And the second one that I've just kind of finished and is out there circulating now is to update the plans. All right, so the first one, refuse to use, is like an emergency response right now. This update plan, we have 2 years to make this happen, okay? But we need to start working on it now. We want to integrate into the revision process worker and public health units, citizen advisory councils, and make this refuse to use a policy in the plan so we don't have to wait for EPA to remove a product in the future. If it gets discontinued, it's done. Who's liable for the health problems a product creates if it's discontinued? The state? Your own self? I mean, who? So this QR code here will get you to the template letters for both the update plans and the refuse to use. Template letters for all the coastal states. There's a parallel action going on where we're also asking people to write letters, and again, there's a template letter, to straight a letter to EPA. Remove Corexit right now. Don't wait till December of 2026. What if there's an oil spill back in the, just say, back down in the Gulf again? What do you think would happen? Alaska has already divested all of its Corexit 9527 during the last big spill down there, the BP Deepwater Horizon. They haven't ordered any more. Every state in the union will divest its resources of Corexit now that they've been discontinued. Does your state want to be the lucky recipient of this? I don't think so. So, you know, if EPA removed, it would just be done. The other thing here is to ask the NRT to guide the RRTs. Just do it. You feds are already recommending these steps. You're already protecting the professional responders. What about all of us, citizen responders, who go out, part of the VU teams and everything else? And the last thing, which is gearing up right now, is that the actual hazardous waste operations and emergency response laws, OSHA's laws, that govern worker safety and health right now are totally inadequate. So we are asking, we have a letter that has, well, as part of the Health and Safety Task Force, Alert looked at the emergency response part of the law only to protect emergency responders and rewrote it. So we already have the legal language we want. We just have to write the petition, and the same for the state of Washington. Washington's OSHA approved plan, and we can do, you know, we could update our plan now without waiting for OSHA. So that's coming soon, okay? And all of this, what happens from this point forward depends on you all, okay? This is really it. If we all step forward now, instead of protesting after a spill and getting sick while we're doing it, it's worth the time to step forward now, take some time, get these letters in, and let's do this, okay? Let's do this. Okay, so a couple things. Questions, remember, we're supposed to be emailing Lovel at SanJuans.Org. That's for this talk right now. I'll take questions from the audience, of course, here. And when I tested this a couple days ago, people were like, where can I get more information? I'm like, oh, right. So on area committees and RCACs, this web page of Alert here, the comments and testimonies page, has these 3 reports on it, okay? So in this report, An Opportunity to Make It Right, just scroll till you find this date. It gives the history of area committees and RCACs and what Congress intended and why, okay? Public health and worker health units were part of the Health and Safety Task Force report that just came out this year in March. And the EPA petition, we just got filed in calling the manufacturer out on not telling the truth in its safety data sheets. That just came out in August of this year. And if you want to see all the studies on cancer and teratogens and skin sensitizers, it's all in this report. And last but not least, if you want to go to the campaign page, Exit Corexit campaign, we're calling this, alertproject.org website, What's the Plan EPA? It just says campaign and the tab button's at the top. So with that, I don't know. I think we are ready for questions. So online audiences, send them in, and anybody here can start it off. Thank you all. Yes. Yes, there's a question.
Someone is asking, has Lori B. received any compensation?
Neither she nor anyone else has received, oh, I'm sorry, right. So the question from online is, has Lori B. received any compensation? Lori B. opted to sue, and that lawsuit, I think her claim has been thrown out, okay? And it's not only her. There's been only one successful claim so far out of 5,000 filed, and it's because the lawyers who set up the rules governing the law, how a person can prove they were injured by this oil spill, are for one chemical, how much concentration. Not even the scientists can tell you that. So it's a total farce what's going on now. Really sick people are getting their claims thrown out. And Lori B. is one of them. And in my opinion, she had one of the strongest cases because she had the photo documentation. So she gets medical treatment when she can afford it, when she has the money saved up. It's crazy. Her doctor is treating her holistically for there's actually holistic treatment for, after the SPECT scan, all the horrors of it, how to de-stress your brain. And I think this is posted on the alert website under have I been chemically exposed? And it's part of coming out of the University of Texas, Austin, and their research down there on on exactly this. Why are people getting sick below levels thought to be safe? How is this happening? They figured it out. So there are ways to de-stress naturally and holistically. And that is helping her. And she's an incredible trooper. And she's very community active-minded. After Katrina, she set up a coastal resource center in Coden to help her community prepare for the next hurricane. You know, there's always going to be the next. And that coastal resource center was there during the BP disaster, and that's where a lot of meetings were held. And it's kind of a huge irony now that she's like just so sick. But yeah. Yes, there's a question from the audience. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Ott. Can you share more about what made the Alaska Regional Action Committee so successful, and what are the components that we would want to consider here in San Juan County in the Salish Sea?
That is a really great question. Okay, so the question is, how did these Alaska RCACs, the Regional Citizen Advisory Councils, what are the nuts and bolts of how they operate, basically? Why are they so successful? All right, so what Congress did in the Oil Pollution Act of 1990 was tie the funding for these councils, the two, into the plan holders' ability to have their plans renewed every year. So you drill, you carry oil, you have a terminal, you contribute to this funding, or you don't get renewed for operations. So that was helpful, and the industry does not have any say in what they do. The industry has non-voting seats. It's the citizens who have the voting seats. So that was another element. And they were also tasked by Congress to do environmental monitoring and tasked to review the contingency plan. So they were given specific tasks. And as part of that, they did the weathering and all kinds of stuff, the weather restrictions. They were not tasked with human health effects. So what I'm calling the next gen RCACs, the next gen Citizen Advisory Councils, would have some changes in, like now we know human health is a problem. There are some very simple surveys that when we get a public health unit up, I'm sort of envisioning where people in communities would be their own, come to this community meeting, let's take these surveys, let's fill these surveys out, Let's get them into our public health department. We could be the boots on the ground that collect surveys. I mean, what, are you going to sit there and answer a phone call and talk to somebody you don't know, or are you going to come to a community meeting and talk to people you do know? It'd be so much more efficient, I think, to include this element of it. And also that would help people understand, I mean, people don't get that oil is really this toxic. And it would help people in other hazards, all hazard emergencies as well. It would kind of bring up the whole public sort of intel on what's in the air that you're smelling. Why is that making you sick? And how do you communicate this to your doctor? It could be a whole public education process. That, remember how the citizens participated with the scientists? We didn't trust the scientists. Scientists said there's not going to be any problem. No long-term no long-term ecosystem effects. The fish will be fine, everything will be fine. And crash. Pink salmon down, herring down, ecosystem down. The fishermen call me. It's a dead zone out here. There's nothing in the water. And the fishermen had all anticipated the crash 4 years later, because that's when, the life cycles of the fish add up to the grandbabies should be back for pink salmon. If they're not back, something must have happened to the parents, and something must have happened to the babies during the Exxon Valdez oil spill. 2 years, boom, 93. The herring, 4 years before they mature. So we will know, we will have an all clear. That's what everybody was saying in town, the native people and the fishermen. We're giving up on the scientists. We will have an all clear in 1993. That will tell us. And crash. First the herring in April, then the pink salmon in August, then the blockade. It's like nobody's paying attention. We need science, not just guesswork and modeling and theories about stuff. And we need the same thing for people, okay? It's not just herring and salmon and other things. It's us. So that's what I'm envisioning. We would have participation by the public saying, well, where are our vulnerable neighborhoods? Are there neighborhoods of people where they're less literate or less educated maybe, or poor, where they don't have regular health care? I mean, where are the vulnerable populations in a huge, city and if they're like in Kalamazoo, Michigan, oh my God, my host took me to the trailer community that lived right on the river, and nobody evacuated them. The rich people in their houses were evacuated, and then guess what? The rich people with their houses right on the river, they soaked up the oil, and so those houses had to be bought permanently. But the trailer people, oh no, cancers, everything else, yeah. So that could all be mapped out. That's kind of what I'm seeing happen here. Parallel with wildlife, us this time. And it could work for all other disasters. You'd have the baseline data. I mean, some people, there's a lot of places where the hospitals, for heaven's sakes, are right on the coast. That's a little bit of a problem. And the other thing is people don't seek out these symptoms, these characteristic symptoms of oil spill exposures, and actually the same as East Palestine. Your body only has so many ways to say you're sick, to warn you that there's a problem. And they are characteristic of cold and flu-like symptoms. They really are. So you go to your doctor, and he or she is going to think you have a cold or a flu if they haven't been trained to do occupational and environmental health medicine. So, you need the specialists. This is really a specialty thing to identify and do early intervention, so you don't get to where Lori got, where her brain she's so many chemicals in her body, they didn't get pulled out in time. They started damaging her organs. Early intervention is critical for this stuff. You smell it, you get a headache, you have a problem. If there was a spill in the San Juans and you could smell it, you're in trouble. That's how bad it is. It's that level that can cause harm. Yeah. Okay, now that I've thoroughly petrified everybody, yes, sorry. Are you monitoring online, Lovel? And there's a couple of questions from the audience. Okay, yes. Right here. Yep. Yeah, go ahead.
I was
Kim.
a first responder on Exxon Valdez and worked out there for 2 years doing damage assessment studies and suffered headaches all the time working on the beaches. And all the people that worked with me, had these cold and flu symptoms constantly. So I've actually absorbed all this stuff, and I hope it hasn't damaged my liver or anything else long term. But I get the whole fact, and I've lived here in the county for about 25 years, and I've told people if you wake up in the morning and you smell a strong petroleum smell, you need to
Get out.
away from that,
Yeah.
because we have all this new shipping that's coming out of Canada now with diluted bitumen, and this stuff is the worst possible stuff. It's basically a heavy crude oil that's so thick they can't put it down a pipeline, so they mix solvents.
I'm going to just pass you the mic.
You could go up, Kevin.
They mix solvents and gas liquids with this material in order to get it to move down the Trans Mountain pipeline, and then they load it into the tankers, and they're coming out of Westbridge Terminal now on a daily basis. Before they were only 2 a month, and now they're daily coming down these Aframax tankers, and they're escorted by tugs to Victoria. But now we're learning just within the last 2 months that a lot of these tankers are now doing a U-turn, or they're coming. They're not going out the straits like the company and Canadians said they were just going to go export this oil to Asia or down the coast of California. They're now turning around and delivering this product to the refineries along our mainland. And I think I'm really unclear as to who is actually in charge of monitoring these tankers anymore, because they were all supposed to be under Canadian escort. They drop the pilots in Victoria, they'd be escorted out to the Straits, and then they go out. And now they're like coming to all our refineries in Washington to replace Alaska crude oil with this diluted bitumen. And the problem with diluted bitumen is that because it's mixed with all this solvent to get it to, so they can flow it through a pipeline and get it into a tanker, if it spills, it's going to, you mentioned all the volatiles going into the air. Well, some of the things I've read about diluted bitumen is like 30 to 40% of this stuff just evaporates into the air. So again, it's just going to supercharge within a day or two.
I'll stop you when you say something wrong. You're doing great.
Okay, good. Because I'm not an expert like you on this whole thing, but I've read a lot about it, and I've read the government reports on the National Academy of Sciences did a study on this. Anyways, the point is, if this stuff goes into the air out in Harrow Straits or Boundary Pass, it's going to end up in people's homes right away. You're going to start smelling this horrible petroleum, almost like if you're just like putting your nose next to the gasoline going in your car or something. That's strong. And my advice to people in the county is you need to make an evacuation plan like right away, because the first responders, they're going to have to like wear respirators and moon suits and gear up to even deal with this stuff. And then the problem is that it's the bitumen is so dense that once all those volatiles go out in the first day or so, it starts to go underwater. So you're not going to have skimmers, you're not going to have any of these standard techniques for gathering the oil are not going to work, because the stuff's going to go underwater. There's no technique that I've seen to recover this oil, so it's going to get mixed down into the Harrow Straits. And we have waters out here that are 700, 800 feet deep. Nobody's going to go down there and clean this stuff up. And the other problem is that our tides go back and forth, up to 18 miles a day. The currents go up and down the west side of San Juan Island and Harrow Strait and Boundary Pass. So this stuff gets spilled up at You know, Stewart Island, it's going to be down along San Juan Island within one tide excursion. It's just going to carry it down, that's going to wash it back up, it's going to wash back and forth. And then all the responders are going to be trying to figure out how to corral it, but it's just going to get mixed all in.
Is there an, I think I heard Friends of the San Juans was looking to try to get another Coast Guard vessel in and escort. We got that after Exxon Valdez. We got extra eyes and tugs.
Yeah, so I mean, we've done studies here through the our local county, local integrating organization with Friends of the San Juans and others to bring in experts on building a model of how fast this stuff would disperse and how long it takes to respond to a shipping vessel in distress. They say it loses, because these big container ships, they lose their rudders, they can lose power. I mean, look at the bridge in Baltimore, got wiped out by a container ship because they lost power and they had no way to control the ship, and it just went into the bridge and destroyed it. Well, we have these big container ships coming out here, and they're getting bigger and bigger, and they routinely do lose power or have an accident on board. And if that happens out here, it could be like within 2 hours, one of these big container ships could go on the rocks up by Turn Point or Boundary Pass, because they have to go through a very narrow waterway to get into Vancouver. And there's no way to get a tractor tug like you were talking about. We call them emergency rescue towing vessels. They're sophisticated tugs, have enough power that they can get a line on one of these giant ships that have all these containers, and if there's like a wind blowing, which we have a lot of wind like last night, and the worst thing happens is one of these ships loses power during a big windstorm, that windage will just carry that ship, and unless you can get a big tug on that right away and hold it out there in the middle of the straits, it's just going to drift over to the shore. It doesn't matter if it has pilots on board or anything, it's just going to sit there and go, oh, the ship's going to go aground here. And these big container ships are now carrying like 2 to 3 million gallons of heavy fuel oil, which is the same as the Exxon Valdez crude oil, basically. It's just this thick. And if they hold the ship, they're not double hulled either. They go on the rocks, they could split their fuel tanks open, and then they could end up out here.
We have a lot more to do. And the reason that you were a very eloquent spokesperson for this, because this is what's happening all along the Gulf Coast too. Big containers coming in into places they shouldn't be, basically, that aren't prepared. They're getting bigger and bigger.
And there's the department in Washington, the ecology is basically saying, well, we can get a tug from Nia Bay up here or some other tug of opportunity. It's too late, because we need one of these tractor tugs stationed in Roche Harbor or Sydney that can get there within 2 hours to one of these ships.
Thank you very much. Do you have something to add to that, Ms. Lovel? Or, well, let me just add that when I was at the Kalamazoo in Michigan, at the Kalamazoo Enbridge Pipeline 5B, I think it was, that blew in 2010 and dumped into the Kalamazoo River. That was exactly what happened. It was the dilbit, the tar sands oil diluted with solvent. Solvent is basically dispersant, but it's pre-mixed with the oil. So that's exactly what happened. The solvent went up in the air, the oil went down, and people were finding a year later that the river, which rolls sediment along, people were doing cross-sections of some of the aggregates that the river normally produces, and they had rolled the oil into them. I mean, it was just like, really? And there was, unfortunately, a dam, the Soresco Dam, and people living near it. And when the water spilled over that dam, it created aerosolization, natural. I mean, pets died, people got sick. This is, the public needs to know what happens. And I just want to point out that we need citizens like this everywhere, all along our states. We have them. But we need to organize effectively into this necklace, what I'm calling a necklace of all of our coastal communities working together to update the plans, to remove Corexit products that get discontinued, and start saying, see, one citizen advisory group as part of their monitoring could say, we're going to do a study on whether tractor tugs or what kind of tugs actually works, in the Gulf area. And it would benefit all the other regions to know as well. We don't all have to replicate the studies. I mean, this could be really, really cool. We'd have our own body of citizens here, which we do for, I mean, come on, you know how, people are supposed to know how to respond to fires and earthquakes and floods, but in an oil spill, everybody's clueless. And that needs to stop, okay? Because otherwise we're going to get oil dumped in our backyards. And the other thing I forgot to mention was that in Arkansas, when I was at the Exxon Pegasus spill there, ExxonMobil, Exxon Pegasus pipeline spill, that came right on a Sunday, church hours, and people are like, what is that smell? Dumped out into a cul-de-sac, ran right down the street and down a storm drain. And because it physically oiled people's properties on either side of the street, those people were compensated by having their houses torn down because the houses all absorbed the odors. And so they were like toxic in the foundation and in the house. But the air went up and it affected the people on the next block and the next block. But since the oil physically didn't touch those blocks, those people didn't get their houses torn down. And all the elementary school children that were downwind of this were suddenly throwing up. And EPA came in, the EPA, what's going on? Oh, they've got food poisoning. And EPA came in with their monitors and monitored up at the ceiling. The little kids are sitting down here in their desks. And they came in with an Exxon person in tow. Just send the kids home. They just must have had some food poisoning or something. Yeah. So we need to get our act together a little bit. Oh, do you have some questions online? And I think we have another one in the audience. We'll take an online one and then shift back to here.
So this is a message from someone. Maybe.
Oh, my gracious. Okay. Oh. Yes. Do you want to?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this person, JF, they say, I don't know if you remember me. My name is Yolanda. My husband was a net maker with toxicity exposed along with my family. He is very sick now. We received nothing, and everything they said would happen has come to pass. His business is gone. His health is gone. There is emotionally survivor basis. I cry to myself as why anyone can think this is okay. This has taught me respect, patience. This is long term. This change of course in our lives, our future. I wouldn't wish this on anyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if you all know, but I was down when the BP disaster happened, and thank you for stepping up and sharing your thoughts. That's from the Gulf, from the BP disaster. And I forget which state now, but the point is I stayed a year in the Gulf Coast, and I stayed in people's homes. And every night I gave a public talk and answered questions, pretty much every night, for a full year. And I came back. When I saw how sick people were getting, I advised that they do blood sampling because the oil was in the air, and the likelihood of, when you breathe, it goes into your lungs and it goes into your bloodstream. When you breathe and it goes into your nose, it crosses the blood-brain barrier, okay? And it gets into your body. And so to prove that it was in people's blood, there's a test that people could take. And people took it, and they were in the upper 99 percentile nationwide of having these oil chemicals in their blood. And the doctors, I actually got phone calls from medical doctors, because medical doctors have to administer this. They have to draw the blood. And the medical doctors were saying, you don't know what you're doing down here. You're turning the Gulf upside down. People trust their doctors more than they trust their mothers. And I don't know how to treat for chemical poisoning. And I have been ordered not to write chemical poisoning. And there is a testimony by one doctor, The Government Accountability Project took testimony of people across the Gulf, and it's in the some of the reports that I mentioned. And this one Gulf doctor said, and this was in Catfish, it was Mississippi, and they said, this doctor said, I have seen something like this happen before, where people get sick, and all of a sudden the doctors don't know what caused it. And he said it was during Vietnam, when we had napalm raining down on us. I was a Vietnam doctor. I got sick too. And people I were treating had these rashes. And we were told as doctors, it's not what's being sprayed on you. You can't write that, because that would have implicated the federal government to be liable for the health problems. So, and he said, so there must be something that's going on here that it's like that, where the government, and the government has, the EPA has listed these products as to be used, they're approved, based on tests to marine life, not to people. And the industry is supposed to report the health effects that are known, and they're not right now. Well, they're going to be by December of 2025. The list is going to look a lot different. So we are in an amazing period of change right now, and I am sorry every day. This is what keeps me going for what's happened to people in the Gulf. A lot of the people I stayed with are dead now, or people in their families are. But I'm here, and Kim is here. He was up here talking about being exposed with Exxon Valdez and having the exact health effects I was describing. And it's all depends on, it's not just how healthy you are as a person, but it's your community where you live, and education and a lot of other social factors play into your health. And if you're stressed about, because there's a lot of racial bias going on, that's emotional stress is wearing, and you're going to be more vulnerable, okay? So it's, I mean, it's not just Lori B. There's tens of thousands of folks that are sick. Oil sick, they call it in the Gulf. So there was a question from the audience. Oh, and folks, I know your cases are going, getting discharged in the Gulf Coast, and I'm hoping this is not over, because now that the manufacturer has discontinued their products and basically admitted that there were health effects, that we can get not necessarily a retrial, but something like some sort of congressional fund like they did for Agent Orange, and just say, you were there, you got sick, you get compensated. That's it. So, because I don't want to make you, I went through a litigation too, and it's just as stressful as going through the oil spill, basically. So, I mean, let's get compensation that's going to be real and help people, and not forget what happened in the Gulf. Yes, I'm sorry. There's an audience person.
I do have a question, but I would prefer to remain off camera.
Well, I can repeat your question if it's short.
Most of what I've heard is regarding human health effects with exposure to dispersants. But I do know that humans are mammals, and they're just part of a large species of other mammals. Can you go down the list of what, if dispersants were used in Puget Sound, Salish Sea, what mammals are going to be affected?
Ooh. Okay, so let me repeat this. And the question basically is, I've talked a lot about human health effects, and I've done that because that's what's been neglected historically, okay? But since humans are mammals, aren't the other mammals similarly affected, and what mammals would those be? And I will say, first of all, that during the BP disaster, well, actually, I'm going to step back and say one of the things that the science has consistently found now regarding Corexit dispersants, which are supposed to be the least toxic of the dispersants that are listed, okay, are what they do is when they combine with oil, so when they're sprayed and they combine with oil, that product, that oil dispersant combined, is worse than the oil alone, because it penetrates more easily across the skin, across the internal organs. It makes it worse. So we're a situation where the oil alone is bad, but when you combine supposedly the cure, you're making it actually worse. So, and you're not just making it worse for people. And so from the Gulf Coast, there was unusual cetacean mortality for the next year after the oil spill, and it's because the babies were being aborted, think teratogens, there were miscarriages, there were still deaths of the baby dolphins, there were deaths of adults that had carried this stuff in their bodies for too long and basically gave up. So very high unusual cetacean mortalities carried, and we're talking like manatees and dolphins and lots of stuff. So into about 4 years. And the scientists estimated that it would be like, it's like literally generations down the line before a recovery would happen. There was a population of dolphins called the Barataria Bay dolphins in Louisiana that are in a sheltered area where actually scientists could study them over the long term. So there was an epidemiology cohort. Epidemiology means a study group that was studied over the long term. And that study population is still going on. And they're having adrenal symptoms, kidney failure, major respiratory lesions in the lungs. I mean, it really hammers the internal organs. And reproductive problems. Okay, so that's what's going on. And there's a parallel going on with humans. And for here, our orca population is like iconic in the Pacific Northwest, but they're like the apex predators, and part of the orcas eat other marine mammals. And I know after Exxon Valdez, I know there's a lot of well-intended wildlife rescue efforts with birds and with marine mammals, but the thing is it gets on their skin and the birds on their feathers, and they preen and they get it inside, and once they get it inside, only one of the sea otters that was rescued after Exxon Valdez actually lived more than a year. I mean, that's what's not reported. They're dying horrible deaths. Anyway, so there's like at least 5 or 6 dolphin species in the area. I don't know, what else is there? Dolphins and whales. Oh, there's the different species of whales too. There's humpback whales, minke. I've seen several different kinds of whales through. So do I know all of them? No, but there's a whole slug of them, okay? That would be at risk.
So are mammals the only animals that are affected?
No, the whole food chain down to bacteria. Oh, sorry. The population is it only mammals that are affected? No. And what came out of the Exxon Valdez study and the BP ecosystem studies was that we are talking from bacteria all the way up to sperm whales have been studied, or at parts of them have been studied. Sperm whales, it's their skin cells. They get cancer when they're exposed to Corexit. But bacteria, the Corexit compounds kill the naturally occurring bacteria that eat oil to begin with and make it for a more polluted environment. Okay, I'm seeing another question forming here. I think I want to follow up. Yeah, so fish, birds, mammals. Here's a good one. There was a whole bunch of red tides after the BP disaster. And the red tides occurred because the dispersant, it was found out, took out the predators of the dinoflagellate that causes red tide. So no predators, the population's bloomed, more red tides. Red tides steal the oxygen and make it, toxic for people too. So there's these cascading effects as well. Okay, so then, I have another, hang on, we got.
Final question. During the BP spill, did the oil disperse and disappear, or did it?
Oh.
I know it went up into the air. And
Okay.
I've seen photos of airplanes with oil on their windshields. But is there still oil in the Gulf of Mexico that has been not been collected?
Okay, So the question is, how long-lasting is the oil, the dispersed oil product, basically? Did the dispersants come ashore with the oil? Is the oil still there? I mean, is it all gone? Is it gone? So let's go offshore first. And when the oil was dispersed, part of what it did, well, it was dispersed from the bottom up and from the top down. There was spraying on the ocean surface. And spraying on the ocean surface made little droplets that fell into the water column and were instantly mobbed by bacteria and other things, and particulates, dust particles, and mineral. And it became what's called marine snow. So it absorbed, the oil became absorbed, became something heavier, and lost its buoyancy. So down it goes. And basically what it amounted to was equivalent of the Exxon Valdez oil spill on the bottom of the ocean. And that was documented by the submarines and the remote vessels and stuff that went down. And it smothered the coral, the deep sea coral. And the deep sea coral that have been studied have found that we're looking at probably 30 years before recovery of this stuff. And that's if we're lucky. Now, when the oil started coming ashore, oh my God, don't stop dispersing it, blast it, follow it all the way ashore with those little mud boats that you saw, keep dispersing it. And what happened was, come on, the Mississippi, the water down there is brown. It's not blue like our ocean here. It's brown from all the sediment particles in it. So all this was absorbing the oil disperse and dispersant, and it came ashore. It came ashore as either fragments, tar mats, little tar mats, bigger tar balls, and it also, and people didn't think of this, it came ashore in the wind and the water with every tide, and it washed the sand grains. And there was a huge effort to pick up the visible oil, but what people couldn't see was that all the sand grains, they're not sterile, they have an algae coating on them. And there's bacteria eating the algae. And the oil absorbed. Oil doesn't like to be in water, it likes to be on living things, other oil. So it absorbed onto the sand grains. So there was a film of oil. And I was out with one of the scientists one night who realized that you can't see this. It looks like a beautiful white sand beach during the day. But at night, if you hit this with UV light at a certain frequency, the dispersant actually fluoresces. And it looked like something out of The Wizard of Oz, where this golden beach would just appear at night, and splotches of gold. And that was where all the oil and dispersant combined was. It was coating all the sand grains. So people who believe me, they didn't go near the water. They went, oh, Miss Riki, it was a full moon. I just went up to the dunes, and I sat on the dunes, and I just watched the full moon, and now I've got this horrible rash all over my legs, and I mean, rash, like lesions. What did I do wrong? And I'm like, the wind carried it, the dry sand up the beaches. It's there, and it's now been studied that this actually did happen. And the oil on the beaches was still, so people wade. They wade in the shallow water. And the kids play in the shallow water. And that's exactly where, when the water comes in, it precipitates out. And right along when the wave runs up the beach, there's all this oily material that people are stepping in. And the researchers, they were collecting this to see how much oil, what the concentration was. And they took showers afterward, and they were all itchy afterward, and they couldn't see anything on their skin. And this is in these reports, by the way. There's photos of this. They thought to hit their legs with UV light, and darned if their legs didn't speckle up with blobs of gold in them from where the oil had been pulled across the skin barrier by the dispersants under their skin, so that they could not wash it off with soap and water or anything. It was already in their body. And they were like, whoa. And the levels that they found were actually levels that were very toxic to people, and they did their sampling a year afterward. So think of that. I mean, the beaches, some of them were closed to the public briefly during the spill, but not afterward. So, yeah, it's pretty much a nightmare, and they don't tell you. We don't want to panic the people. Yes?
One more question.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ott. And I wanted to follow up on the question about animals
Right. Okay, so the question is, we have a lot of farms here in the Salish Sea on our land and stuff. So what about farm animals? Is it just marine animals that get hit? No, it's the deer that go down and graze on the beaches. It's the river otters that spend some time in the water, but some time on the beaches too. It's in the Solemn Voe, which is the islands just on the kind of north side of Scotland. They have a sister terminal to what we had in Alaska. And their wake-up call, their Exxon Valdez, if you will, was a couple years before ours. And there are these incredible pictures of, I mean, they knit up there. They have sheep, white sheep normally. And this tanker went aground in a hurricane, and wham, the houses are all black. The sheep are black. The wool is ruined. Right, that's a good point. Yes?
One last question.
Okay.
Can you recommend any documentary films to learn more?
Okay, so the question is, are there any documentary films to learn more? The Cost of Silence opened at the Sundance Film Festival in 2020, in January. And it was an investigative documentary over 9 years that followed people, sick people, and ends up with the horror of the last 15 minutes is all dead and dying children, human children. And it got shut down, the distribution of it got shut down by COVID. But I know that film producer is still trying to get that film out through an online distribution now, and through, it's called, okay, I will make a point of putting that on the alert website. But it's The Cost of Silence, and it's produced by Conception Media. And you could at least see the film trailer for that. And that really follows the human health, the human problem, and it's horrible. So thank you for that last question.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.